So not too long ago, I did a video on women's specific bikes and how, for the most part, the idea of that is kind of a myth. And I had one of my viewers note that a couple of days before, a company called Canyon Bikes, they're a German company, had just done a press release on a new set of women's specific bikes that they're in the process of developing. I think they go on sale later this summer. It had a number of characteristics that they feel really separated themselves from other manufacturers, especially in this space of women's bikes. So I did a little digging. It took a little bit, but I went through some of the information I could find on these new bikes and really did as much research as possible without actually having one on hand, and kind of came up with sort of my breakdown of these bikes to really investigate whether these are actually different or, again, if it's differences in name only. So I'll just get right into it. So these bikes are differentiated from their men's bikes or from their standard bikes in three separate ways. The geometry has two variations, two differences that I can see. So they built these with a more upright posture slightly, so a slightly longer head tube than average, and a shorter top tube, so a shorter reach for the bike. Additionally, they made their smallest sizes with smaller wheels, with a 650B wheel option. And this was done in order to maintain the handling of the bike for these small sizes. And I guess you could call this a third geometric change, is they actually do offer their smallest size is pretty small. It's listed as a triple extra small or extra small, which they say is different than other manufacturers, that other manufacturers don't have this size. And then the final difference is that they made these bikes out of smaller diameter tubing and lighter tubes overall, to account for the fact that women proportionally have smaller, lower power outputs, and generally are lighter individuals. And so here's the questions that immediately came up for me as I was going through this information. And first off, is this geometry different from their men's geometry? Or are we just, like we found in a lot of the other manufacturers, are they taking the men's small and calling it the women's medium? And in fact, this is different geometry. It is independent of their other bikes. And this isn't new. There are manufacturers out there that make their women's bikes with slightly different geometry. Specialized is one of them. So they're not completely alone here. And that kind of brings us to the next question. Is their geometry really different enough? And are they truly in a league of their own as far as this goes? And the answer to this one is a little tougher. It's actually yes and no. No, they're not completely in a league of their own. Because, again, an example like the Specialized Ruby, this bike is a women's specific bike. It is different from their men's geometry. And actually, the Specialized Ruby has, pretty much for most of their sizes, an even more aggressive version of this Canyon geometry, where they have even shorter effective top tubes and taller head tubes for similarly sized bikes. And again, are they in a league of their own? So no, there are manufacturers out there that have some of the same ability to get the same contact points, or this more relaxed posture. But again, they are in league of their own as far as because they've done a couple things. One is they do have this triple extra small size, and also they've gone with the smaller wheel size for the two smallest frame sizes. And why do they do this? This actually, when you put smaller wheels on a very small bike, it allows you to build the handling of the bike in such a way that you're making fewer compromises. When you try and take a very small bike and put 700C wheels on it, there are certain things that you have to do. You end up with a lot more toe overlap. You end up with a much steeper seat angle. And there's a lot of compromises that take place on these very small bikes as far as handling goes. And so the 650B option is kind of a new one. Many years ago, many manufacturers used to make their smallest size with a 650C option, which is, think of the 650B as splitting the difference between the 650C and the 700C. They're kind of right in the middle. In the realm of mountain bikes, you see this as the 650C would be considered like the 26-inch mountain bike wheel. 650B is still 650B mountain and road. And then the 700C would be considered the 29er in the mountain bike world. Now the next question is, are the lighter tubes and the slimmer profiles, are these a good thing? I would say yes, this is a good thing if they've made these lighter tubes and slimmer tube profiles so that they can take advantage of this opportunity to make the bike more comfortable for the smaller riders. When manufacturers just take the same carbon layup schedule, they're using the same amount of fabric, think of it that way, the same amount of carbon in their very small bikes. Often these small bikes are actually even stiffer because they're smaller triangles, and so you put a lighter person on there and it ends up often being not a very comfortable machine to ride as far as from ride feel and vibration dampening and other things. So we won't know about this for sure until we can actually ride one of these, but it bodes well for the fact that they have the opportunity, again, to make the bike ride well and more comfortable. But this does lead to another question. Since they are using lighter tubes, smaller tubes, does this then make the bike have a weight limit on it? What if you're a smaller rider, you're 5'2", but you don't weigh 120 pounds or whatever the proposed weight is for a rider that size or a woman that size? This is unclear at this point as to whether they do have a weight limit or kind of what the parameters for these lighter bikes, what they are. And there's nothing listed on the website, and I haven't found any information to that effect at this point. But it does stand to reason that if a bike is made with lighter tubes and smaller tubes, that this is a bike that, when tested, is probably going to fail at a lower amount of force. And so I'd imagine that fatigue or that failure point has to come a little bit sooner. And so does that translate into a weight limit for the bike? That will have to be continued. So overall, I think these bikes are an improvement on the market for women and smaller riders. They have good geometry with shorter reaches if you need that for whatever reason, whether it's short arms or lack of flexibility or whatever. And while there are other bikes that, for the most part, can provide the same contact points as these Canyon bikes, you do have the benefit of a triple extra small size. You do have the benefit of smaller wheels, the 650B wheel options for the two smallest sizes in these ranges, which can improve the handling of the bike for the smaller riders. Potentially a more comfortable bike based on lighter tube layups, etc. But again, some of these things bring about problems like we've talked about with potential for a weight limit. I don't know that that's the case, but that's something I was wondering about. And another downside with the smaller wheels, with these 650B wheels, there's a downside in the fact that, especially in the short term, it can be kind of difficult to source wheels, tires, tubes, that sort of thing. And many people who had 650C wheeled bikes, the smaller version, from years ago, and they were really popular among triathletes, it can be a real pain in the butt to try and find a tube that fits if you're off somewhere. And so, especially in the short term, until or unless other manufacturers kind of jump on board with this standard for road bikes anyway, then it might be difficult to source these things. But overall, there's a lot of good here. I really like what they've done here. They've clearly thought about this a lot. They've done their homework, and with just a few of the caveats I mentioned before, I think this is a really good effort. One thing to note, though, about these bikes is obviously they're billed as women's bikes, but I'm not so sure that they shouldn't just be billed, again, as bikes for smaller people. Now, assuming that there's a male that's, maybe 5'3" to 5'7", I think there's a reasonable assumption that they would fit this bike, or this bike would be designed for them as well. The only caveat being, again, going back to potential for a weight limit on the bike. Since overall there's a decent chance that a 5'4" man is going to weigh a little bit more than a 5'4" woman on average again. But, discounting this, I can't really see a reason why these shouldn't be just billed as bikes for small people. So now I know these bikes won't be available potentially for another few weeks. But if you have any information on them, or you're kind of curious about them as well, or you've heard some other things about them, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. Put it in the comments below. I'm going to continue to try and reach out to Canyon and see if they have more information for us to answer some of these questions. But let me know your thoughts. Check out some of my other videos, and I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe. Thanks. We'll see you next time.